Hey Scott,
Good morning.
thanks so much for doing this. I'm excited to have you on the program. I'm usually blown away by folks that have those kind of like double digits years, and especially you've got 2 decades of sobriety behind you, and I'm always really interested to kind of hear how sobriety kind of like changes throughout your life. I'm approaching 8 years myself, and the way that I talk about my sobriety now feels vastly different from how I was talking about it in the first year. So I'm always eager to hear about stories like yourself and the way that you kind of wear your sobriety.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I do talk about sobriety vastly different than I did when I was first sober. In fact, when I was first sober, I didn't talk about it.
Yeah, same.
I just really didn't talk about it much at all. It took me a really long time to even, I don't know, to get over being ashamed of it. So I now talk about it a lot, and I
Hmm.
talk about it a lot so that other people might not be ashamed.
Yeah.
You know, I if there was one thing that really bothered me during the era 20 years ago when I got sober, there was a lot that actually bothered me, but one thing was that we there was still a lot of shame associated with it.
Hmm.
And that I believe that shame will keep people using and drinking. That shame of needing help or trying to, you know, admit that they're an addict or a alcoholic. That can be a very, very difficult step for people because of the shame that's associated with it. And there was a lot more of that.
Isn't it kind of wild that in some ways you don't really wear the same type of shame of being known as like an absolute crazy partier as you do as being known as a sober person? Like I never once ever questioned, oh man, I wonder if somebody thinks if I party too hard. But the second I got sober, I was like, I hope no one ever sees me as just a sober person.
That's a great point. Um, and I certainly had a wild, wild reputation. Um, but when I first got sober, it was more like just I need to survive. I'm really at the end of this
Hmm.
run. I knew it, and I knew that it was going to have to be really just a day by day thing. Being in the hospitality industry was it was very unusual for people to be sober. So I was just sort of hiding it for a long time. And now, 20 years later, it's just the opposite. I talk about it kind of every chance I get. Someone commented this morning, it kind of made my day. I thought it would be appropriate to bring this up. Someone commented about my posts on social media. They sent me a message and said, when I read your posts and I see your posts, I see this dedication to having a vibrant, creative life in sobriety, and it's
Hmm.
very inspiring. And I see that a lot. People tell me they're inspired by my posts because every chance I get, I reference sobriety because I really feel in my heart that not well, I know for a fact none of what's happening in my life now, especially the amazing things like family and entrepreneurship and leadership and success, none of that would have been possible.
Yeah, I
So
feel exactly the same way.
certainly making the decision to get sober was the single best decision I ever made. And you can say, well, what about to get married and to have kids? Well, that all came after I got sober and would
Hmm.
not have happened, or certainly wouldn't have happened in the really sort of beautiful way that it has.
Was there ever a moment where you thought you might need to leave hospitality?
I didn't give that much thought. I was told that by a few people that I should probably consider that, but I didn't really give it much thought. I just went day by day and just one day at a time, and started to set up this structure in my life so that I could go to work, do my best work, and get out of there, stay away from the bars and the drugs, and fill my time with something healthy or meaningful. And there were some people who were really, really supportive of me, who kind of knew my struggles but didn't really say anything. They just really supported me. They just it was kind of like, we get it. Mm-hmm. We know what you're going through. They didn't say it, though. They just knew. And they were just really, to this day, I just really appreciate that. They could see that I was working toward trying to be better. And they were just really very supportive in that. But again, it was sort of kind of secretive, because if you said you were sober, people went, oh, "What's wrong? Mm-hmm. What's wrong? What's wrong with that guy? What's going on?" And then it's this whole explanation, and instead of now, if you say you're sober, people are like, "Oh, okay. Well, we have a spirit-free option here."
Yeah.
So, what a great transition we've gone through with that,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I read in one article about you that you were kind of shocked at how you were able to continue your rise, your prominence as like a chef while still using. What tools did you have to put in place, or what rules did you have to give yourself to want to continue rising your career and creating a name for yourself while also removing drugs and alcohol? Like, if the trajectory was already going up for your rise as a chef, like, how did that change when you became sober and continued to build your name?
Well, it just, the trajectory went tenfold. So even as I was struggling with addiction and alcoholism, I was still pretty determined and pretty hardcore. I would stay up all night and still work all day. I was very dedicated, but of course, I wasn't working at my potential at all. I had really, really great raw talent that was just waiting to be unleashed, and it was being unleashed a little bit. And so even a little bit made me more successful than most people around me. And also my work ethic was much stronger than most people around me. But certainly the potential wasn't there, because you can't operate at your best when you're, as you know, when you're
starting at less than zero.
Yeah. You just can't. And so how did it change when I got sober? I mean, it just really took off for me. I started to even taste food in a different way, and smell things in a different way, and appreciate things more. But I had a lot of work to do, because even though I was sober, I was still very bitter, and I had, some really, really difficult trauma to have to deal with. So I had a lot of work to do. But I can tell you that I immediately felt better about myself, because I didn't have to live a double life anymore. There was a time in my 20s where I was all in. I was that guy. My entire lifestyle was, partying.
I can relate.
Unapologetically. But when I got into my 30s, it was, most of my friends were finishing college and getting into careers, and I felt that sort of societal pressure and my own personal desire to do something more than just be at a club every night and sleep all day. So I was working very hard, but I started to live a double life, because if you are good at something, people take notice and you start to become, I was in the media, I was getting, all sorts of attention at food and wine festivals, and I was, coming up and winning awards, and, it was, wow, I can't let people know what I'm doing, after midnight. Whenever, I might go and have a few drinks with my colleagues, but then they go home, and then, I continue the party and finish the bottle and, start using drugs. And it was just, it became a nightmare for me to try to manage.
And your brother saw that?
Oh yeah, he saw my struggle for years, and just knew, because he's also in recovery, and he knew that it was only going to be, it would be a matter of time, but that I had to make the decision. It wasn't something, they all said, we hate to see you struggle, you don't have to. He knew that the battles I was fighting, but he also knew that it had to be my decision. But ultimately, he was the one that helped me make that decision by, continuously telling me that he cared, and that he wanted to see me have a better life, and that he believed in me, and that I didn't have to suffer.
Yeah. I think when we have people like that in our lives, and I talked to Mickey from Ben's Friends about this on a previous episode, and I think a lot of us are kind of like fearful of what we could say to that individual that we can see that's hurting, because we don't want to scare them off. We don't want them to be completely removed from our lives. And Mickey had a really great point of, whatever we say in hopes of planting a seed. And I thought that was really powerful.
It is powerful. Mickey's a dear friend of mine. I think you might know that.
Yeah.
Someone who's helped me immensely, and he says some really amazing things that just resonate, and that's a great point. And I think my brother, he knew that. He did not want to, he knew that I would cut people out of my life if they discovered, what, and I did. A lot of people who took issue with my lifestyle, just, okay, you don't have to be in my life, kind of thing. And I'm not sure that I would have done that to him, because we've always been very close, but I might have, and he knew that I might have. And I think that he was careful about that, but he also planted those seeds whenever he could. And he also just planted that seed by being a good example of someone having a good time in life sober,
Yeah. I think that goes back to what you're saying about, people reaching out about what they see on your social media post, of all you're really doing is living your best life. And that's a lot of what I do, in hopes of showing that the joy that I receive from my sobriety is worth working toward, and when you see those folks that are struggling, you wish so badly that you could pull them through the door. But the best I can do is stand in front of an open doorway with visibility to what's on the other side, in hopes that they walk through themselves.
That's right. And just pick up the phone. I've had 2 or 3 people tell me, they're celebrating 6, 7 years. I think one person is 6 years this year. And they say, well, I remember day one. I told him that. And he said, well, you answered the phone. Because I didn't feel like I really did much.
Yeah.
To help them, other than just talk to them. But that's sometimes all it takes. In that moment when they know that they need help. And I was the same way. I just needed someone, just like one person, to believe I could do it.
Yeah.
And that was my brother. And people just need like one person, and then you can start to build that. That's your foundation for building your recovery community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then many people believe you can do it. And, so I think it's interesting how if you just answer the phone or return a text or check in on someone, how much that means.
Yeah. What was happening mentally that you knew it was time when you chatted with your brother? Because you also have an interesting story of, being in the hospital during your grandfather's funeral, and when you got out, you went straight into a liquor store. For some people, that would have been the tell that it's time, but you gave it a little extra go after that. How did you know that it was time when you chatted with your brother versus earlier signs?
Well, sometime between when I was hospitalized, there was a year from the time I was hospitalized to when I got sober. Sometime in between there, I remember consciously understanding that I had no more control. Mm-hmm. Like I had lost control. And I don't mean just I can't have one drink. I mean, I had lost control. I mean, I was like one night away from just total disaster, jail. I'd lost control. I think only someone who's in that state or has been in that state can understand what I'm talking about. There was no more ability to lead a double life.
Yeah.
I couldn't pull it off. So I knew that and was still trying to. So it was between that and the physical health issues that were happening that made me realize. And my brother said the words, you're going to die. And someone's going to call me, and I'm just waiting for that phone to ring, like every day now, like today. Mm-hmm. And I knew he was right. A lot of times you hear that and you're like, yeah, whatever, shut up.
We're all going to die.
I'll do what I want. But he was right. He was absolutely right. I had, just a routine surgery where the anesthesiologist didn't want to put me under because I was in such bad shape. He told me that. He sat down and talked to me, what they found in my system through blood work and just physically, he's like, you're just in really bad shape and this is a routine surgery, but I'm concerned about putting you under. And then I had a doctor that just fired me. Just, who gets fired from a doctor? The guy was like, you're just killing yourself. I don't want to treat you anymore. What's the point? You're not going to die on my watch, so find somebody else to treat you. So these are the conversations that were happening. It wasn't just my brother. It was, probably a dozen people that year, including doctors and surgeons who were telling me, you're 30 years old and you're in really, really bad shape. And I had been at that point, I had an autoimmune episode, which nearly killed me, and I had no more, pancreas, and, I'm insulin dependent, and my blood sugars are wildly uncontrolled, and I was, this all happened right at the same time Oxycontin hit the streets, and it just was I was in really bad shape. So that's what occurred. All of those things, when I wasn't completely out of my mind, these are the things that I was thinking about. And I really desperately wanted to have a normal life and live. There was a time in my 20s where I didn't care if I lived or died. I really didn't. And I think it helped me survive. Honestly, I think that attitude in the places that I was and the people that I was with, I think that really helped me. And I truly did not care. And I said those words out loud sometimes. But that was not the state that I was in my 30s. I did want to live. I really did. And so, and I could see these glimmers of hope for myself. Hey, I have some talent. Hey, I might be able to be something if I could just, this one thing, if I could just get a handle on this one thing. So, and I was bargaining all the time, as we do.
Mm-hmm.
I went through that for several months after the hospital. I'll drink white liquor instead, it has less sugar. I'll just drink wine. It's a joke.
Yeah.
But I tried. I tried all of that for that whole year. That whole year was really a nightmare. I had created a nightmare for myself, and a lot of people had given up on me, and a lot of people thought I was going to die, and they were right. And I'm just grateful that I wasn't that person that didn't wake up. I had a friend in my 20s who was type 1 diabetic, and we partied with him every night, and one night he just didn't wake up. His blood sugar had dropped when he was intoxicated, and he went into a diabetic coma and never woke up. So it happens all the time. I don't know how or why it didn't happen to me, but it didn't in that year. And so fortunately, I believed my brother when he said, "You're going to die," and I believed the doctors who were telling me I was going to die. And so all of that played a role in that decision.
I feel like I felt pretty similar. Especially in my 20s, I didn't give a shit if I was going to die or not because, my dad died when he was 39. His dad died when he was 40. I thought I had a limited run anyway. So
Yeah.
I was like, who cares? And I think I was unafraid of death because I never really thought of it. And then I got sober in my 29th year when I was eyeing down 30. And it was then the closest that I had ever come to that 39 year of my father. And I had made the decision to take a month off that year. And when I came out of it, instead of just saying, "Hey, good job," patting myself on the back and like cracking a beer or some champagne, I really thought about how I was feeling. And I think that clarity allowed me to really think about like, oh, I guess I could die. And I was making it a lot easier for death to find me until I gave that up.
Yeah.
I didn't have a conversation with, somebody the same way you did with your brother, but I found a journal entry that I had written when I was drunk one time. And it was so revealing to me that like there was a sober person in there that wanted to get out, so much so that it found pen to paper during intoxication. And that was enough of a little light that I needed. And I think that that's what gave me, because I had taken months off before, but I think finding that and then entering that last sober October in 2017 is kind of that little bump that I needed to make that decision.
Whatever it takes, whatever that little nudge is, it's different for a lot of people, but almost everyone has that nudge. Something told them it's time, And man, if I had known how incredible life would be, because I was one of those people that thought, I couldn't imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't even imagine life without alcohol and drugs. And getting sober out of necessity to live, you don't really think about how wonderful it's going to be. You just know, okay, I have to do this. I have to do this.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, you're like, wow, this isn't bad.
Yeah.
This is pretty great, actually.
This is what I was hiding from.
I know it's really extraordinary how afraid we were of that,
Mm-hmm.
and how amazing it has been. And I think a lot more if more people knew how amazing it could be to face their demons, to face their traumas, to do that work, but also just live free of that, you know, you're just enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if more people knew how it was on this side, a lot more people would jump earlier.
So you mentioned that you didn't really talk too much about it in early sobriety. Was it because I was the same way? I feel like I didn't really start talking about sobriety until I started realizing the gifts from it. Is that what changed the way you talk about it for you?
Yes, but also just yes. I will say for sure when I realized what all sobriety had given me, I felt a responsibility to share that. And I also, just the way it works is we give back, and I reached a point where I felt like I needed to give back. And so, you know, my sharing my story publicly, now I started talking about it a little bit more, but sharing it publicly happened. It coincided with Mickey and Steve Palmer starting Ben's Friends. Because they founded that in Charleston, and I had attended some meetings there, and then I was part of that opening with Ben Murray. I knew Ben and was, you know, part of the whole story as it unfolded, and so I felt like I should do the first chapter outside of Charleston, which I did here in Raleigh. And just before we rolled out Ben's Friends Raleigh, I shared my story with the News and Observer here in Raleigh. And just before it dropped, I remember having just a panic. You know, I called Mickey and I was like, man, I think I said too much. I don't know what are people going to think, you know? And he just said, I went through the same thing. Just take a deep breath and know that you shared exactly what you wanted to share. And you'll be surprised at how it's received. And he was right. It was so well received by the community that I received a lot of beautiful letters from people that appreciated the fact that I would be so open about that. And then it was just liberating. It was just like, okay, it's out there, you know. It's the PG-13 version, but it's out there.
Yeah.
And then, and I've shared a few more details here and there throughout the years, but sharing that was for really for those reasons, to share what I had experienced and to offer that to others and let them know how, first of all, wherever you are, it's probably not any worse than where I was. And I have a pretty amazing life now. It's still hard sometimes, but it's pretty amazing. And so you probably can too. And I just say that in a humble way and hoping to inspire people who might be thinking, yeah, maybe I can be that nudge.
Yeah.
You know, and I have been for several people. So it was certainly worth it.
That's what's so great about, you know, being able to share these conversations with people. You know, this show kind of started as a selfish endeavor of me wishing that I had heard more voices when I was making that decision. Because as you know, like when you're making that decision, you feel so alone.
Yeah.
Like inevitably, you know that you're not, but at the time, it feels like you're the only person that something like this has ever happened to. It's hard to find somebody's story who kind of like sounds like yours. So, you know, this season I will hit 100 episodes, and you know that's cool for a show, but it's even better that I now know 100 more people.
Yeah.
Than I knew at the time when it felt like I had nobody, you know, and I think that's really important. And I've had people come up and say that they've heard parts of their story and other people's stories. So I say that to say it's awesome, but I also say that to say thank you for sharing yours as well, because, whether we know it or not, we may in sharing be that nudge for somebody. And I think that's really important.
It is, and maybe we're not, but we at the same time are gaining from our sharing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
So
I've discovered such a wonderful way of talking about my own sobriety through talking with others. I've developed a lush vocabulary just from hearing other people's stories and hearing my own story within their telling.
I agree, and it helps me to sort of make sense of it. And a lot of the making sense of it actually has happened for me in the last couple years of recovery, believe
Yeah.
it or not. I shared at a meeting not long ago, maybe a couple weeks ago, that I did a lot of really good recovery work in the last couple years. And it just really helped me to make sense out of it. And I think making sense out of my own personal story, because a lot of it didn't make sense to me. I had a lot to figure out, and I'm the type of person that needs to figure it out. I need to make sense of it. Some people don't. Some people don't need to do that.
Yeah.
They can just put it behind them and move forward. That didn't work for me. I really needed to make sense of it, or at least make some sort of sense to me in however twisted that might be. It really does help, though, I think. And so all these stories that I hear from other people, through therapy, meetings, things like this, it all helps make sense out of my journey and my experience. And in the last couple years, it's made a lot of sense to me. And it took 18 years to say that. But it's 18 years of work, though,
Yeah.
leading up to my 20th, where I can say, you know what, I did that because of this, and this happened because of that. And it's really been helpful.
I go to therapy, which is a relatively recent thing for me. And
Same.
it's kind of incredible how often I will go back to my story of sobriety and the way that I have been teaching myself to live an active life. And I say that because I found a general kindness in myself. I had to be kind to myself to allow myself to make that change within sobriety. And that, unlocked a lot of doors. It was the first door that I had to walk through for everything else in my life that I then had capacity to deal with. And then therapy has kind of allowed me to find those other roadblocks that I had built for myself that were hard to get past, because I wasn't applying the kind of same work or role of responsibility that I had taught myself through sobriety to some of these other life struggles. And it's really been revelatory to me to realize I didn't just stop drinking. I taught myself how to live, and that has become monumental in how many more pieces I have in my toolkit to kind of help me through the parts that I would have used to just I used to just have a drink about. I was like, this seems difficult. I'm going to have a drink about it and I'll deal with it later. And now I've realized wow, I really do have it all inside me to take these steps to just, to be more humble, to be more kind, to be more gentle, to be a better, husband, father, partner, all of the above. It's all there if I just unlock it. And all I need to unlock it is that sort of clarity and introspection.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel the same way. I certainly would not be able to be the husband and father. I got sober just a few months before I met my wife. And I'm very, very grateful for that, because I think it just would have been another relationship that I sabotaged,
Yeah.
But instead it's been a beautiful, incredible journey. And I had the ability and the capacity to be this person in this type of relationship my whole life, but I never had a healthy relationship that I can really I mean, I look back on my relationships and I just feel sad that I was so incapable of being in a healthy relationship, because they were really good people. But I was sick. I was very sick. So yeah.
How did work change for you? Did you notice yourself changing in a leadership capacity or how you run a team?
Yeah, for sure. I think that when drinking and using your ego is constantly at play with your decisions and your choices, and I started to make a conscious effort to manage my ego, to be a lot more humble and be a better leader with empathy and understanding. That took some time too, though, for sure. And also my cooking got a lot better, because in the time that I would spend, at a bar or out at night, I was at home researching menus and reading books and writing and making notes. And then waking up early because I'm not hungover, and maybe arriving at work a little early to try something new. And so my cooking got way better, and my leadership started to go in a completely different direction. And I think that direction has never stopped. It's basically a direction in moving our industry in a different way altogether, not just the way I operate, but the way that we can impact our industry as a whole.
How did you see the relationships with your staff changing? Did they approach you differently, chat with you differently?
Well, I think that they recognized me more as a human, someone who, I admit my flaws. I don't have to know everything. Yes, I'm a leader and I'm in this position for a reason, but I don't have all the answers all the time. I don't need to. We can discover them together. We can work through issues and problems together. I will be your leader. I will have your back. I think, I became more of a human. I think they recognized that. And to this day, I still get that, I am a leader of a lot of people. We have a lot of employees now, and a lot of restaurants. But I think ultimately I do it in a very human way. So I think most or all of my team would agree.
I had a chat with Phil Spear, and I love that he references shift the post shift. And, he's got Commodore Running Club, and they will do yoga on Saturdays, and just kind of like ways of keeping staff involved and having something to do other than like going to a bar after the shift. I saw that that's something that you do as well. Is like you had said like find something to do after work that isn't a bar. I also saw that like if you taste wine, everybody is spitting and there's no shift drink. What else can be done within these establishments that helps, take us into the next chapter that keeps the industry healthy and thriving and reinventing itself?
I think the most important thing we can do really is just lead by example. When I was coming up, my mentors all partied hard, or a lot of them did. Work hard, play hard. I was notorious for that. And it wasn't really a good example to set. A great example to set is to show people healthy ways to deal with stress. This is never going to be it's always going to be a stressful industry. But there are healthier ways to deal with stress. Exercise, hobbies, spending time with family, whatever it may be. I enjoy motorcycling. I like to go fishing with my son, my daughter and I, my family all together. We like to travel. And so these are all very healthy ways to unwind, de-stress. And I think just leading by example is the most impactful way. As subtle as that may seem, I think it's extremely impactful. So that people see their leaders living life in a healthy way, they generally will follow that lead if there's an admiration and a respect. And it's kind of that simple. I think there's many, many other things that we can do, but that's probably the thing that I think we can be most impactful, is just by leading by example.
That felt like my personal experience as well. You know, I was a beverage director at the time that I decided to quit drinking. And, you know, I went from, you know, being in the restaurant with everybody, and then we would all go out after the fact. Sometimes we would go out before. And when I stopped being in those places and, you know, I incorporated running into my life and just being outside and hiking and stuff like that, I even noticed like a small shift in the conversations that staff would have with me. You know, they were telling me about art. They were telling me about movies they watched or like trails that they were on. And when we would have our like bar retreats, instead of going just to like other bars to see what folks were doing, like we would go to different cities and see their art, see their architecture. And it really just kind of like opened my world of like the many other places that inspiration and storytelling could come into bar development and drink development than just, you know, the mimicry of our peers in some ways. And it just really, I noticed such a significant shift in the way that my staff interacted with me, just from what felt like a very subtle shift on my end.
Yeah, and I see what a huge shift that we see is that we attract people who want to be professional and then want to go home to their families, their hobbies, their healthy lives. We do not attract those who want to do shots after shift, because we're not going to do it. We have a zero tolerance, and it's that simple. And if that's something that you're attracted to, this is not the restaurant group you're going to want to work for. And so that was a huge shift in just who we attract. And that's been amazing for culture, turnover, just our overall happiness at work. You know, we attract like-minded people who really just love our industry, but didn't really love the underbelly of it for a long time. Now they're like, wow, there's this group that we can work with and we can still be in it, but we don't have to worry about, you know, the bad behavior that went with it. So that's been a really great positive shift.
That's great. What can you tell me about healing transitions?
So Healing Transitions is it's a residential recovery facility here in Raleigh, where they just don't turn anyone away. You can come there intoxicated. You can come there, you know, the police can bring you there instead of taking you to either jail or the hospital, and you can detox there, and you can stay for up to a year if you go through this program. You have to follow the rules, and it's a very regimented program, and you can leave at any time you want, and you can come back. You just have to start the program over again. And it's been incredibly successful, and in my opinion, every city should have a place like Healing Transitions. It even now has doubled as a shelter. because a lot of shelters here in Raleigh were shuttered during COVID. And I don't think all of those beds came back. So Healing Transitions became that as well during that time. And so just kind of continued that to offer shelter to people. But mainly it's a recovery facility. There's a men's campus and a women's campus, and I've hired people who've graduated from this program with great success. I was introduced because of a Ben's Friends meeting. The director came to a Ben's Friends meeting just to make sure that we were having the right discussions, that would count as one of the meetings that their participants we would sign off that they came to a meeting. They were required to attend so many meetings a week, and he came to just see what Ben's Friends was about, see what the discussions were about. And he agreed it was a great meeting and that it could count as one of the meetings that for their requirements for the participants. And I got to be friends with the director from that when he came to visit that meeting. And we just continued to engage more and more, and I would engage, how can I help, basically. And what I discovered was they always need money, funding. There's obviously local and state and federal grants and funding that they get, but as the city grows, so does the need for this facility. And so my first real job with Healing Transitions was to serve on the capital campaign committee to raise money to more than double the size of the facility. And it wasn't, it was a huge effort by a lot of people, but we managed to raise $30 million, and it is under construction.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and then they asked me to serve on the board. And last year, this was a beautiful thing, on October 20th of 2024, it was that weekend was my 20th sobriety anniversary, and to celebrate that, we did a huge dinner and invited many people throughout Raleigh, and we raised more money for Healing Transitions. And so that was a really incredible, meaningful way for me to celebrate without making it about me. Hey, look what I did. It was like, wow, I made it 20 years, and let me give back to my recovery community by celebrating in this way, and we'll raise money so that others could receive this gift. And it was really beautiful. It was a beautiful thing. So I am a board member, and I continue to look for ways that I can serve Healing Transitions and help them grow. And I just think it's an amazing place that's literally saving lives. And I think every city should have something like this, and we should continue to expand on it here in Raleigh.
Congrats on that. That's really
Thanks.
awesome. Congrats on 20 years. Congrats on your story. It's
you.
Really inspiring and awesome to hear.
Yeah, same to you.
My final question is, what do you love about yourself?
I love that I am extremely self-aware, and that I continue to grow and learn, and I'm open to that. I think that it's almost I'm hypersensitive to that, because for so many years I wasn't able to do that. And one thing about who I am now is that I am very open to hearing and listening and growing and evolving as a human being. And I think that makes me a better human every day. And it also takes work, because ego gets in the way, and emotions and all of that, and really it's kind of sifting through all of that and saying, hey, there's something to be learned from this. And I think Mickey would tell you, from when he met me till now, and he tells me this a lot, he's like, it's like night and day. And that's what I'm most proud of, I think, that I'm just so open to learning and becoming a better person. And I hope that I continue that throughout my life.
I love that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and I've enjoyed this conversation very much. And thank you for sharing some of your story as well.
Of course, me too.